listing presentations, going in there and influencing a seller to use you as their real estate agent.
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost, let's go over preparing for this listing presentation. Joseph.limo, what do you do to prepare for your listing presentations?
Yeah, so my prep work now is designed for me to be out of the house or out of the office within 20 to at the most 30 minutes if I need to be
Hmm.
fast. If I get a seller
Hmm.
on the phone and they're like, "Yes, I want to sell my home. Yes, I'm willing to meet with you. Can you come now?" I want to be out that door within 20 to 30 minutes at the most. So a lot of my preparation um, is templated. My listing presentation has been built so it's templated. Now, when I show up, it's going to appear and feel customized to that seller, but they don't recognize how much of it is already pre-built. So just know that up front. I
Hmm.
designed my preparation or a lot of my listing templates so I can be out of the door within 20 to 30 minutes. So what I traditionally am doing then is as soon as I hang up with that seller or get the text or whatever that communication is come over, then the first thing that's going to happen is obviously a deep dive onto that property. And I like to think of it this way. Think of a target. Okay. You have like the outside circle, and then you have smaller inside circles until you have the bullseye. And what I want to do is I want to get data that starts from the outside and goes all the way down to that property specifically. So I like to use visual data because I think sellers need to understand the story of not just how much can my house sell for, but the other dynamics that are happening in a market so that they can understand that outside layer of a target until we get to the middle. So that way they understand why the middle is the middle. If we start there and don't explain any of the exterior, they may not understand why that value or that approach to listing price makes sense. So I'm doing a deep dive on the data around either city or zip code, all the way down granular to that specific property, like an appraiser would, 15% variance in square footage, less than a half mile if possible, and no more than 3 months. If I need to add outside of that, I will. But I know that's the metric that I'm really looking for specific to that home. And of course, if we're in a specific neighborhood, or subdivision, I'm trying to stay as tight to that as I can, assuming there's enough volume to pull data from. So I'm doing all this because I want to make sure I'm really clear about value. Now, assuming I've never seen this home before, I'm going to have a much more narrow range of my perception of value once I experience the property and can see it.
Hmm.
What are the improvements? How has it been maintained? So I'm basically trying to make sure that I know the bumpers. I know the low side and the high side. And then when I arrive at the property, I can start to narrow that wherever, it seems appropriate for that home. Again, the
Hmm.
improvements, how it's been maintained, the whole nine. So that's a
Hmm.
lot of the time that I'm spending there as far as that property. I'm obviously pulling data on the property profile, building out a, property valuation report that aesthetically looks good. I have my marketing bio, a lot of the details that I want to share about who I am as a practitioner. That gets printed, put in a folder, but I'm also building out that listing agreement because my expectation is when I show up, we're getting it signed.
Mm.
Yeah.
Ha- yeah, not to cut you off, but how do you get the info about the specific property? Are you like having a phone call with the seller? Like, do you have like I want to say like yeah, do you have a phone call with the seller before going to the listing presentation where you ask them a couple
Mhm.
questions about the property so you can actually run all these comps as like as tight
As
as
much as I
possible, or like
can.
yeah,
Yeah,
or like how are
absolutely.
you, yeah.
Yeah, so definitely there's a conversation with the seller, and there's a few different ways it could happen, but traditionally will be like over the phone. And this is where we're trying to understand what are some of the improvements that you've done to the property since you own it. What do you love about your house? What are some things that you would like to change about your home? Or are there any deferred maintenance items of your property in this moment? Just to better understand from their perspective, which again is not my perspective, but theirs, where their home sits in the range of improvements and maintenance, because that will help us to figure out, given the other comparables and the photos online, how it lines up with some of the other properties.
Mhm.
But there
Nice.
again, that's part of the preparation. I'm still going in there, not I'm not dead set on what this home is going to land on in terms of value.
Mhm.
I know that some sellers really either underestimate their home, and a lot of them really overestimate their home, their improvements. Sure, you spent $40,000 in your kitchen, but it's been 20 years since you did that. So although the quality of the, oak that you used is wonderful, but it still may not be the type of improvement that people want to see now and give it the value that you did when you did the improvement. So there
Mhm.
again, I'm still making sure I've got a bumper of range. I know what the
Yeah.
low is and I know what the high is.
Nice.
Mhm.
So you have your templated listing presentation,
Yep.
and within that is all the value that you provide to them. This and then your comparable analysis, your basically CMA on the home.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
I usually will get like the stat sheet from the MLS or the comparables that I drilled down to.
Hmm.
And that's just going to look like data. And I do that on purpose. That's for me.
Hmm.
I do that data sheet because that for me is once I walk in, now I can very easily start to hone in on the more specific value range that I have in mind.
Hmm.
And if a seller looks at that, it just looks like a bunch of numbers, and that's fine because that's really for me. That's the
Hmm.
data that I need to really figure out where I want to land once I'm there at the property.
Love
Um,
it.
some of the other details that I have, as I mentioned, are going to be the property profile. I don't
Mhm.
traditionally print a net sheet because I don't know what that net sheet's going to be until I'm there. But I will do, the high and low, some of those estimated values from there, and then of course build out a net. But I usually like to, once we land on listing price with a seller, I'm on my mobile device or iPad and I'm doing an actual net sheet for them right then and there.
Mm. What's the property profile? What is that?
Property profile is just something that would, you could extract from most multiple listing services, but it's going to be like a characteristics and a breakdown of that property. Who's on title, last time it sold, taxes that were paid last
Mm.
year, just some of the basic characteristics of that specific APN. But that's important to note because you can get a better understanding of, are there special taxes assigned to this property? When's the last time they sold it? What was the mortgage when they bought this home? So that way you could, if they don't have that information handy, you could kind of guess with some accuracy what the balance is on that mortgage now, assuming they made normal payments.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Nice. Love it. Got it. So, okay, so seller called you
Hmm.
and they were like, "Hey, Joseph, ready to list our home. Can you
Yep.
come out next week?"
Yep.
Right?
Oh, next week? Yeah,
You're
that's easy.
Yeah, next week. So
Yeah,
you basically scheduled with them and you asked them those couple questions. Hey, before we schedule this, can I ask you a couple questions about the property so
sure.
I can or do you have a script for that? Like, do you
I
have a
do. I
script
have an
for
entire phone call around that for my sellers. Yeah,
oh,
because
nice.
part of the conversation for me is, why they're selling this home. It's a really important
Mm-hmm.
piece of how I start my listing presentation because I
Mm-hmm.
want to get way deeper into that motivation or to that purpose behind their home sale. So I'm definitely
Yeah.
asking some initial questions like, great, beautiful home, or tell me about your property, how long have you been there, what's the purpose of you thinking about selling this home, or why are you moving out of state, whatever they're sharing with me. And
Mm-hmm.
then when I get to the actual listing presentation, we're going to drill really deep into that. So
Love
part
it.
of my initial conversation is the purpose behind it, some of the information about the home so I can give it a clear idea of value, and then their timeline, what's ideal for you, not only getting it on the
Nice.
market, when do you want to be out of this home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, cool. So just got off that phone call. Um, a week is gone by and you've done all this research. You got
Hmm.
your CMA dialed in, you have the property profile, you brought a blank net sheet. You also have basically that makes up your listing presentation packet.
Yeah,
Um,
remember, I also include the listing agreement itself that's ready to
mhm.
go. There are
Oh,
items I
yeah.
clearly don't have completed there. Okay. Number one, I
Hmm.
don't have a listing price in there because that's something we figure out with the seller directly at
Hmm.
that moment. And I've created bumper of values, right? Low end, high end. Once I'm there, I can hone in clearer on what specifically I think is the right strategy for a listing price and what we
Hmm.
think the ultimate sales price will be. So my listing agreement doesn't have a listing price in it. The second thing that I don't bring to a listing agreement, I think this is really important. I don't put commissions in there yet. That's a conversation with the seller.
Hmm.
That's something that I negotiate with the seller.
Hmm.
Furthermore, it's something that I figure out with a seller before I even get to price.
Hmm.
So I need their commitment during the listing presentation on compensation before we even talk about value. And
Hmm.
that's for two reasons. If you're not working with me, why am I going to give you my professional opinion? Number two, if I'm not your guy, what does my opinion matter to you? Go
Hmm.
with the person that's you're going to ultimately work with. So
Yeah.
we'll talk about how I set up my listing presentation that way as well.
Yeah. Love it. Love it.
And then the
Okay,
last thing I
cool.
have in addition to the listing agreement is my seller homework. So my seller homework consists of two things. One, some marketing information that I want from the seller. This is more intimate details about the home. I like my marketing to reflect the personality of that house. I know that that shines really well when it comes to marketing the property, not just the characteristic, but how the home lives. Second piece is going to be disclosures. I get my sellers started on disclosures right when I take the listing because I
Hmm.
know how important it is to have thorough, proper disclosure. So as soon as we get that listing agreement signed, I'm on to the seller homework. I need the marketing information from you guys, and I need you to get started on the disclosures, including that seller information sheet for title.
Like it.
Yep.
Nice. Okay. So you have all this day before listing presentation. Um, is there any like follow-up that you do for the seller?
Yeah,
Like
just
do you
confirming
send
our
out,
appointment.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
and usually there will be some additional dialogue. There's some things that I'm gonna just make sure that they know to be ready for. For
Mhm.
example, I usually will send them a small pre-listing packet just so they can kind of get an idea of who I am. That's via
Mhm.
email, and it's video driven. Hey, this is who I am. When I knock at your door, you're gonna know who my face or what my face looks like, assuming I never met them.
Mhm.
And I'm starting to give my digital resume so that when I show up, there's already that level of professionalism established.
Mhm.
And if it works well, that level of credibility when I walk through the door, like, oh, this is the guy that sent me like a digital resume. I've already seen some of the work that he's done. So that's
Mhm.
something that comes ahead of time. And then traditionally I will check in within 24 hours just to, make sure they're ready for me, make sure if there's any, small changes in time, arrive 15 minutes early, show up 30 minutes later, just, being common courtesy to make sure that the seller's timeline still works out. Especially if they're after
Nice.
work, if it's like a 4 o'clock, 5:30 appointment, checking in with them just to make sure, hey, I know we're set to meet at 5:30. How does your drive home still look? And if they're like, yeah, I'll be there, no problem. But if they're like, I'm
Mhm.
cutting it tight, I might just make the call and say, I'll tell you what, I'm going to arrive at 5:45 because I would rather, you not rush on your way home.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Nice. Love it. All right, cool. So now day of listing presentation.
Hmm.
Well, yeah, day of listing presentation. You guys show up, shake hands, you enter the home.
Yeah.
What's the first thing that you're doing?
First thing I'm doing is I'm doing a preview of the home with them. And there's two schools of thoughts here. Okay. Some people say, don't do that. You're going to have a seller who's really going to start to fall in love with their house again and tell you why it's the best house of the history of houses ever made. I understand that. Often if I need to, I will pull out literally just a blank sheet of paper and start making notes if a seller starts doing that and getting out of hand.
Mhm.
And ultimately they'll ask me like, well, what are you writing down? Right? Like what are you taking notes of? Because I will start looking at things and making notes and they'll ask me like, oh,
Mhm.
what are you noticing over there? And my explanation will be, you're doing such an amazing job of explaining every detail of this property, and your home is incredible. But I want to make sure that I'm consistently looking at a home like a buyer would without your
Mhm.
commentary. So I'm just
Mhm.
making notes of maybe a buyer's perspective on the home. That
Mhm.
usually will at least create that separation between your opinion of your home and what a buyer looks at.
Yeah.
So that usually will at least give me the opportunity to really start to sit down and speak to that difference. So if a seller gets out of hand, that's my approach to it. Usually that doesn't happen though. And the reason why I do that uh, review of the property with them is twofold. Number one, this is my opportunity to get that intimate experience with that home to hone in on value. Number two, and maybe even more importantly, this is when I build rapport with a seller, having a conversation with them. If I pass by a family photo, commenting on that photo, we're engaging and building relationship and rapport. That time is crucial for me in my sales process.
Mm. Like that.
Yep.
Yeah,
And then,
it's a good way to. Yeah.
no, go ahead, man.
I was gonna say it's a good way to. It sounds like a good way. Like walking through the home is a great way to build rapport because it sounds like you're gonna come across all the books you may see, all of the maybe they have a DVD stand of some movies, and it's like I feel like you can learn a lot about an individual just by walking through their home.
Yeah, and I think this is where people really build comfort not only in who they're working with, but who they are outside of work. And this is where
Mm,
we get to connect. If I can have a connection with them on a human level, sit down with them and blow their minds as a professional, it's over. I can sit down and be the ultimate real estate professional, but if I'm just a guy in a suit, it may not work the same way. Vice versa. If I'm a really great friend that they're like, man, I could sit down and have a beer with this person, that's great. But professionally, they didn't really make it for us. You got to do
mhm,
both, in my opinion. That's definitely my sales methodology. I know there are ways that I built out my listing presentation that when I get literally to like the second visual slide for them, I've already got that listing. Part of that is
mm,
because of this walkthrough with the seller.
mm. That makes sense. Yeah. Let's get into the actual listing presentation.
Sure.
Like, yeah, what are you saying? Like, so
Mhm.
like once you previewed the home, I'm assuming you come back to dining room table,
Yeah.
living room table, somewhere where you guys get sit down and talk.
Yeah, and usually to
Um,
like set up the walkthrough, I'll have my stuff with me, right? Usually
mm,
I'm
mm,
have a like a bag or briefcase, if you will. I'll
mhm,
set everything down. I'll grab the folder out for them and I'll set it on whatever table or wherever we're going to set afterwards.
mhm,
So I'll ask them, where can I put my stuff down? Where are we likely going to chat after the walkthrough of your home? And they'll let
mhm,
me know. I'll put my stuff down and then we'll get started. Okay. So after we've looked at the home, we're starting to build some connection. And I don't let the conversation get too far off base. And I'm not there for 30 minutes before we get started.
mhm,
Usually it's like 15, maybe 20, depending on the size of the home and maybe some of the features. Okay.
mhm, mhm,
But for the most part, I'm directing that traffic. And at some point I'm say, great, you know what? Your home is, great. I really like the X features that I've seen, for example. I've got a lot of great details to go over with you. Is it great if we get started? Is there anything else you wanted to show me before we get started? Okay,
mhm.
because maybe there's something else that's really important to them. But I want to go and sit down and let's get the ball rolling, right?
Yeah.
So a couple of things I think are really key. I always have a visual for my listing presentation. Not everyone wants to do that, but for me, it serves two purposes. One, visually, it's aesthetic enough for the seller to have an impression. They're impressed by it in most cases. More importantly, it tells me what I'm supposed to say next. Okay. So, and it's not verbatim. It's just usually they're all pictures, but I know this slide means this. This is where I go next.
Mhm,
That is so key for me, Cameron, because it allows me to do one thing really, really well, and that's listen. When I get into a conversation with them, I don't have to worry about what I'm supposed to say next. One swipe of the finger and the new slide appears, I'm right back on track. So I can have a
mhm,
great conversation with them, listen, even go off in small bunny trails. I can go from literally step A over to D, back to B, and then over to Z if I needed to, right? Like it doesn't
mhm.
matter. It allows me to have a very customized dialogue with my seller without me skipping a beat and without me getting flustered or off kilter because every time I slide that new slide over, I know exactly where I'm at and what to say next. So that's
Nice.
why the visual is important to me. But one thing I
Mhm.
really like to do as I'm pulling out the visual, and usually it's either on a laptop or a tablet, I have that folder in front of me. And what I'll do is I will pull out the listing agreement and set it next to the folder, open up the folder and say, I've got a bunch of stuff in here that we'll cover, but this is going to be yours when we're done. But I pull that listing agreement out. Most people know that that's a real estate contract. And I want it there because if they're going to have any kind of emotional reaction to it, anxiety, fear, whatever it is, let them get over it now. I want to
Mhm.
basically to become wallpaper for them. Okay. So I pull it out and leave it there,
Mhm.
and then we dive in. And just know, like, my sales methodology is meant to, and pulling out the listing agreement is proof of concept. It's meant to feel like a flat line emotionally. I
Mhm.
don't want my listing conversations to feel momentous to where there's like an apex or a climax, which is the closing. I personally feel like that's very rudimentary or basic sales technique, and it's not
Mhm.
very effective. If my sales process can start at hello and I can keep them feeling comfortable the entire way through, that is powerful sales. So that's one of the reasons why I want to pull that out. I don't want that document coming out of a briefcase to start a climax or a momentum to where they're starting to feel anxiety. Want it to feel
Mhm.
like a flat line as much as I can.
Mhm.
Yep. All right.
Nice.
So, instead of walking through, I'll just kind of explain to you like the methodology of my listing presentation. It really
Yeah.
starts with their purpose. So I have a slide that says like, it's all about your goals. So this
Mhm.
is where I'll repeat, hey, when we were on the phone, you told me you were selling this home because you're moving to Arizona to be closer to the kids because you want a bigger house. Like, I'm repeating to them what they told me, right?
Mhm.
And then my simple statement thereafter is, tell me more about that. And they start talking. And then I
Mhm.
start learning. And then I will ask more penetrating questions. And remember, there's two types of question or types of questions that you can use in this dynamic: open ended and closed ended. Open
Mhm.
ended is like, tell me more about that, or you could even repeat the last thing they said. It's just really effective to just keep them talking. Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
Close ended is to pin down on something like a major point and then move on, or to seek clarification. So when they're talking about something, I may ask a brief question that's yes or no, so I'm clear. And usually it's more for my learning. And then I'll keep them talking from that point forward. Okay. But
Mhm.
that is really an important um, part with the seller, because I'm asking them specifically why they're selling. This is going to help me to identify their timeline, and it's going to help me to really figure out what their true goals are around this move, because I know selling and buying real estate can be highly emotional, and there might be times that they start making decisions that are not congruent with their goals. If
Mhm.
I don't know those goals, I can't bring them back to those goals. And
Yeah.
usually my approach in the future will be, hey, when we sat down and talked about this home sale, you said the purpose behind it was X, Y, and Z. Well, I'm asking you again because the decisions you're making, I'm not seeing how they're in alignment with that. So either A, are your decisions in alignment with the original intentions, or did I get those goals wrong? So it's not me pushing an agenda, it's me making sure that they're clear that their decisions are in line with their goals. This is how
Mhm.
I'm never going to be a yes person for my clients.
Mhm.
And people really value that if you can navigate it correctly without frustrating them. So once I get into a lot of the information about their move, I've learned a lot at this point. Why they're moving, the bigger purposes behind it. This is where I start to uncover things like what's important to their values in life, family, financial decisions, freedom, being closer to nature. Like, I'm starting to really draw out much deeper reasons why they're doing what they're doing. And that's everything to me. Okay. So once
Mhm.
I get through with that, the next section is going to be, hey, listen, thank you for sharing those details with me. I really appreciate that. And I want you to know it's important for me to know those goals so I can help you accomplish those goals. Let me share with you a little bit about who I am professionally. This is when I'll start to show them my accolades in my career. Okay. I'm going to speak to my sales volume, awards that I've won very briefly. And I'll share with them, I'm showing you this not because I want to brag. I just think it's important that you're working with someone that's done enough volume and has demonstrated the success that you can see a track record and a history so you know what to expect for your experience as well. I definitely show them some of the other differentiators that I have, like being a certified forms trainer for my state board. This means that I get to teach other agents our contracts, and I'll share with my clients. I want you to know that I'm going to give you that same level of understanding because that's your tool to navigate your sale. And I'm going to make sure that you know how to leverage that better than the competition, better than the buyers. In fact, better than a lot of agents. Then I also speak to the fact that, I'm also a professor of real estate. And I kind of go through my history of my career, all with the purpose of helping them understand when you hire me, not only are you hiring me for all the marketing that we're going to get into, but you're hiring me for all of these additional experiences because that's what you get to leverage for your benefit. Then I slide over to a really powerful slide, which is basically who I am outside of real estate. And I tell them, outside of real estate, this is who I am. And I think it's important. You've been kind enough to share with me who you guys are and what matters to you in your life. Well, this is what matters to me in my life outside of my career. And I also share with them, just know our entire family is run through our real estate business. So I'm very appreciative to be here and meet with you guys. Know my family really appreciates you giving me the opportunity to meet with you as well. And then I move on.
Mm,
Okay. Those are some real
mm,
staples, but that's because they're true to me. Those
mm,
are values that I sincerely hold. And what I learned a long time ago is because I'm clear as to who I am as a person and the values that I hold strong to me, I want to make sure they're themes through my sales process because it will attract people who have similar values and it will push away people who don't. And I'm good with those. The people who don't want to work with me, they're not wrong or bad. They just value different things. And I may not be able to give them the kind of experience that they're looking for. But the people who value what I value, they're going to love every single moment of our journey together. Okay. So then what I tend to do from that point forward is I'm diving in to the methodology of selling real estate. And I really boil it down to three main keys: presentation, what the home needs to look like, prepping for the sale, promotion, which is all marketing, and of course, pricing. Okay. So I want to
mm,
make sure that they're really clear on how all these things work together. So what I do is I go through the presentation side of it. I go through the promotional side, which is obviously all the marketing tactics that I deploy for them. Definitely want to make sure that you're clear on the differentiating marketing approaches that you offer as a listing agent.
mm,
But I attach to that compensation because compensation is a promotional piece of marketing a home. Seller's ability to understand the compensation to a buyer's agent, and we know there's going to be a lot of shifts there. So it might look like a seller concession to the buyer to offset some of those costs for the buyer have their own agent. Those are some of the most impactful and powerful ways that a seller's been marketing for decades. So I help them understand that, and then I allow them to make their decisions, which we all should be doing all the time because commissions are negotiable, right? But we need to help our seller understand the balance. Yeah, you want to get a great deal for yourself, and I respect that. But we also want to make sure that you're not positioning yourself to where you might lose some of the most important marketing tactics by trying to save a dollar. But at the end of the day, I'm providing the data for my seller to make decisions. Okay.
mhm,
Once we land on what their approach is going to be, that's when I turn the listing agreement over to me and take a pen and write it in. I'm
mm,
having them commit. And as I mentioned, the third piece is pricing. So I'm having them commit from the presentation side, how I approach that, the promotional side. They're basically subscribing to my approach to getting their home sold. Because if they don't pick compensation, we're not moving forward.
mm,
Okay. So once that's settled
mhm,
and on the listing agreement, two things happen. Number one, now I'm positioned to move forward on pricing. Number two, I pretty much know I already secured this listing
mm,
because I'm having them commit to compensation.
yeah.
It's over with.
Mhm,
Now we get into pricing, and we get into pricing in a really fun way that I like to do it. And that's for me to switch gears and go, okay, as we dive into pricing, I want to start to help you understand the buyer's psychology. we're going to look at this from a buyer's perspective, because if you understand their psychology, you can leverage that to your benefit as a seller. So that's
Hmm.
when I get into some things that I know statistically buyers are looking at, how they look at data, like everything on all the different websites out there. So that way the seller can better understand the methodology behind pricing their home effectively to ultimately get what they're looking for. Their home sold for the highest dollar amount and or selling faster than other properties. But this way I'm just positioning my seller and empowering them with the knowledge to know how to move those levers. Then, and that's where I talked about having information from that outlining target and then starting to hone all the way down. And that's how I
Hmm.
talk about pricing with them. So by the time we're done going through specific comparables that are the most accurate for their home, they're in a position at that point, and I know my boundaries, right? I've came in with, the value range. Now that I've been there, I've honed in on that even closer. Then the question becomes, with all the information, what do you have in mind for the listing price that's going to get you the result that you're looking for? Okay.
Hmm.
And they're going to tell me a number. And I'm going to immediately know, does that number fall within my boundaries? If it
Hmm.
does, great. If it doesn't, we're going to have a further conversation. Okay.
Right. Right.
Because I want to start to give them my professional opinion either way. I need to
Hmm.
help them understand. Okay. Once we
Hmm.
pick pricing, I write it on the listing agreement, and then we're transitioning the whole thing over to, all right, let's go through this listing contract so you understand exactly what we're doing. And
Hmm.
then we start to get into the next steps. And this is where I'm scheduling potentially a home stager, their
Hmm.
professional photographer, professional videographer, if there's any handymen that are necessary when they're coming over. Now, this is stuff that I discussed during the presentation and promotion
Hmm.
side. Okay. So
Hmm.
this is not new to them. We're just picking dates at this point.
Hmm.
The real goal
Nice.
in those dialogues, though, Cameron, is when I start, even when I talked about my family, one of the things that I would normally say there is, should we work together? Okay. So I'm not being very presumptuous there. But as I start
Hmm.
going through my presentation and promotion side of my listing dialogue, I'm going to start to tinker with and toy with changing up that verbiage when we get the home stager out here, when my handyman is done, when we do the professional video and photo. And I'm doing that because I'm trial closing my seller. I'm intentionally pushing the envelope of, I don't want to be presumptuous and assume I'm your agent, to I'm your agent. And I'm just going to let my language dictate that transition, but I'm checking in on them. I'm reading body language. I'm seeing if there's any adverse response to me pushing the envelope and just assuming. Most of my
Yep.
approach to selling is all assumption closes. Okay.
Mm.
Until they
Hmm.
tell me to stop. That's when I'm going to come back and do like tie downs. Okay. So I'm
Hmm.
assumption closing throughout most of my process. This is why it should feel like a flat line, because I'm just leading the way until they tell me to stop it.
Hmm. Can you give an example of assumption close?
Sure. One of them is literally like, as I'm talking through, like, let's say that we've decided that professional home staging is something that they want to pursue, which is
Hmm.
something that I pay for through my compensation and the whole nine. Okay,
Hmm.
that's one of the value propositions that I give my sellers.
Hmm.
As we're talking about it and they're starting to sound excited around it and whatnot, then I'm literally going to start to change my language around, okay, great. Well, I'm going to have my stager come at this point, right? And what do you think are some dates that would work for you, or times? And then I start letting them know their process. But I start to
Hmm.
shift my language to, if I'm going to list your property, to, okay, as soon as we're done today, and once we've authorized a listing agreement, then we're going to schedule my stager. I'm going to say something like that in
Hmm.
passing. It doesn't feel anxious in my body, like I'm just being matter of fact, like this is what happens next. I'm leading the way, but doing that is a trial close because I want to see if I get
Hmm.
resistance. If I do,
Hmm.
okay, cool. Let's take a step back here and let's start to make sure either A, we're addressing something that was missed, or B, we're sharing the rest of the value. So whatever concerns they might have had are gone. And I will trial
Hmm.
close again. All right. But usually I'm not finding much resistance because I'm just leading the way. What I tell agents is all the time is that our buyers and our sellers are going to hire us for our leadership. Well, you got to demonstrate leadership, man. You got to just start
Mm-hmm.
leading the way and start going in there with a high level of confidence and the path that's necessary for them to be successful in their venture. So I start doing that literally at the listing presentation. And again, if I get resistance, fine. I know that we either have not covered enough value or there's something else there that we need to address. Otherwise, I keep rocking and rolling. And before you know it,
Yeah.
we're signing a listing agreement. And, a lot of times my sellers are like, okay, well, I guess this is just the next thing that we do. And we just do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would
I
also
like it.
recommend if an agent is not finding that that is a common path for their listing presentation and they're hearing similar objections, I would really encourage them to review their listing presentation and try and answer those recurring objections before they come up.
Mm.
Because I know for my process, for the most part, I've done that. I've addressed things like other agents. I've addressed, marketing. I've addressed what it looks like to navigate the transaction on a really high level. And that's because earlier in my career, those were the type of objections that I would get when I'm all said and done. Okay, well, if I'm
Mm.
getting recurring themes here, that means I'm not addressing it very well in the beginning. So let's do that instead.
Yeah. That makes sense. Makes
Yep.
sense. Okay, so you went through this whole listing presentation. You guys came to an agreement on price, came to an agreement on commission, and then I'm assuming they signed the listing agreement.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
And usually
nice.
before we land on price, one of the last steps that I think a lot of agents miss is that net
Mm-hmm.
sheet. And
Oh
I'm the
yeah.
one who addresses it because I'm like, look, now that we've landed here, like I know for you, it's not really what your home sells for, but what you're walking away with.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take a moment to really dive into that. And
Yeah.
then I get really focused on based on what we agreed to, what that net sheet would look like. I know my net sheets are slightly higher than reality,
Mm-hmm.
and I do that intentionally. Okay. I also tell my seller, let's assume, if the home is immaculate, I'll tell them, listen, I don't see $2,000 of repairs in here, but just for the sake of us being conservative with our numbers, I'm gonna assume something gets found, it's $2,000 worth, and I'm gonna subtract that from your net. Now remember, this is an assumption, worst case scenario. So if there are no repairs, when it's all said and done, you can add another $2,000 to the numbers that we're going to crunch. But I
Mm-hmm.
would rather do that than try to be so tightly accurate with my net sheet that when we close, even if it's literally $500 less, that could frustrate a seller. Like, wait, we thought if we hit this number, we would get this net, and you don't. That's not a good look.
Okay. Nice. Okay, so signed listing agreement. I'm sure you guys hugged, shook hands, petted the dog on your way out.
Yep.
Is there anything like post um I would say, well, yeah, is there anything else that you do like post listing presentation for the seller?
Yes. Yeah. In
Or yeah.
fact, I mean, think about this. We've already established the game plan. And I like my
Mm-hmm.
listing presentation to be really collaborative. Like my approach to listing the property is collaborative. We are creating a blueprint together. So whether
Mm-hmm.
that's handymen, you know, any types of repairs or just improvements aesthetically that they want to do, staging, the video and photo, like whatever we're doing, we're talking through that together and kind of establishing timelines. So when I'm done signing the listing agreement, a couple of things happen. Number one, I get into that seller homework that I talked about and I explain to them, this is what I want on the marketing side, and this is what's really important on the disclosure side. Okay. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
make them do it there. It's going to take them a little time, but I get them started on it. Okay. And then we
Mm-hmm.
look at the blueprint of our successful home sale for them and we start to identify what are our next steps. Is it the stager? Is it a contractor? Is it the photographer and videographer? And we start to carve out, when are we going to start booking these things? I
Nice.
traditionally find that most of my sellers are about, I would say at the least 10 days, but it's not uncommon for them to be 3 weeks out from the moment we sign to when that home is ready to go active on the market, which is ideal. This is when I can start to work with them on whatever improvements we need. It also allows me a lot of the prep work for my marketing. When we hit the market, and this is all part of promotion that I share with them, we hit with a punch. It's not like a dribble in. Okay. Here's a coming soon, but the photos won't be ready for a while. Like everything's ready to rock and roll. And that is all not only designed with me and the seller, it's agreed to by the seller. They understand based on the buyer psychology and how the buyers see time on market as a detriment. So we do all this prep work. So when we hit the market, like we have a grand entrance to the market. And this is all predetermined, pre-planned, and really laid out with me and the seller collaboratively. So they are clear on what we're doing. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
benefit happening there. So, yes, depending on what that blueprint looks like with them, we are scheduling dates of what happens next and why.
Love it. I want to jump right into questions
Yeah,
just
let's do it.
because, yeah, there's some really good questions about listing presentations and whatnot. Let's see.
Questions from the internet.
So
Let's go.
yeah, quick questions for the internet. This I've seen variations of this question often. The question is, seller wants to list for 17% above comps.
Wow.
How do you approach listing presentation? How do you approach this listing presentation?
Yeah, it's a great one. So this is where I get into the buyer psychology. And what I do is I help a seller understand, and I think most people have seen this slide, but how effectively are you helping the seller understand the power behind this data? And what this slide for me shows is that whenever a property hits the market and the pricing is right at perceived market value, then we know 60% of the buyers that are ready, willing, and able to buy that home will show up to see that home because it's priced where it should be. Okay. Now, the way I explain it to a seller is one strategy, right? I don't say idiots will do this or it's really dumb if you did this. I just give them space because maybe this was their idea beforehand. But I say one strategy is to price your home a little bit above market value so that way you have room to negotiate when a buyer writes you an offer. Some
Mhm.
sellers approach selling their home with that strategy in mind. What they don't recognize, though, and I show it on the slide, when they price their home above market value, they're starting to really chip away at the number of people who even show up to see it. Now, I've already explained to them that my entire marketing method is to do one thing and one thing only. It's to get buyers through the front door. That's the main purpose of all of the things that we do for marketing is to get someone from shopping online, loving what they see online, whatever it is. I need them in their front through the front door because
Mhm.
they'll shop like crazy, but they don't decide to buy until they're standing in that kitchen, standing at that backyard barbecue, standing in that master bedroom. Like some of those main features of the home that's going to close somebody, they need to be
Mhm.
in that space. That's when they're emotionally connected. So I
Mm.
help them understand based on what I explained about the marketing, get them through the front door. That strategy, what sellers don't understand is that it's going to keep a significant number of people from ever entering the front door.
Mhm.
Then I help them understand. The good news is the reverse can be true. And it is when you sell your home slightly below market value. So that way you can really accentuate the buyer pool. Number one, you're going to have more buyers in your pool, but you're also going to make them really excited. And that's why we can see the stat line, how significantly more people walk through the front door. And I'll tell them where they need to be when they're going to buy your home. And they're the ones who will repeat it to me, standing at my kitchen, standing in the backyard, overlooking the pool, whatever that feature is. So
Nice.
that's how I approach that. The other thing
Nice.
I think is really key, and this is again the buyer psychology part, I show the seller the stats around the time on market versus the interest level in a property. Okay, so that's
Mhm.
another slide. And then another one I show them, which is really important. It looks similar, but it's different. The amount of time on market versus what the property ended up selling for. And
Mm.
it's a line like this. The longer it's on the market, it ends up selling for less than the original asking price. The
Mhm.
percentages go down.
Okay, this guy said, I did a listing presentation last week for sellers in my own neighborhood. I did not know them, but did know they were interviewing other agents.
Mhm.
They just informed me they went with another agent How do you not take this personally?
I don't know that you don't take it personally. I still do to this day, Cameron, but I do it in a way that is not detrimental. Like for me, I don't want to get mad at them. I do it where I take it personal because I take responsibility saying, what could I have done differently? Okay.
Mm,
Um, I think in the process, it's hard to say because it depends on where these leads are coming from, right? We got to go all the way back to the fundamentals of who are you working with? I'm really lucky, Cameron. Most of my business is repeat and referral business.
mm,
It's not that often anymore that I'm competing with a lot of other agents. At the most, I might be competing with like one other. Okay. So I don't have that a lot where I'm lined up against, four other agents. That's a lot. So
mm,
I think it is important though that if you're dealing with a clientele or a lead source, that means you could be in a very red ocean, a lot of competition, that be a question that you ask.
mm.
There's nothing wrong with that. And if you can find out who the other agents are, feel free to ask. Just be matter of fact with it.
Yeah.
Hey, so I'm really excited that you're giving me an opportunity to interview for for the listing of your home. Are you interviewing any other agents? Yeah. Oh, great. Who are they? Just ask the question.
Mm.
You may not get very far with it because they may not want to share, and that's fine. But don't be hesitant to ask. It's not a problem.
Okay, so let's see. You mentioned you get a lot of your business from referrals. And
Yes,
so
sir.
speaking of getting business, obviously this is one of the main questions that lots of real estate agents have.
Hmm.
So the title of it is How to Get More Listings.
Hmm.
And so 9 months into the business, young realtor, haven't closed a deal yet, but have submitted two offers for two different buyer clients. Tried cold calling ever since I started, and most of the leads I generated ended up nowhere. Stayed as consistent as I could with open houses since I started. Most of my immediate sphere knows I'm in real estate by reaching out to them when I started, meeting them at social events often, and social media engagement. What should I do to get more listings for the year of 2024? Any advice would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, it's a good one. Okay, so I heard a couple of qualifiers in there. So I would want to get granular with this agent. They tried cold calling. I would
Mhm.
like to know what try looks like. And that's not being facetious or knocking them. I want to know what that means.
Mm,
Also, I heard as consistent as I could. There again, maybe they're doing this every single day for 4 hours a day, and they're like, that's as consistent as I could be. Or maybe I tried it once and I thought about doing it again. I just don't know what that means. So
mm,
I would want to better understand those qualifiers in there. But here's what I'll tell you. Here's how I built my business, Cameron, before I had a big database. And I tell this story often now. My wife and I were about to have our daughter, Valentina, and I'd been in the business for I don't know 4 or 5 years and did fine, right? Like it was good. Like no, I was doing just fine, no big deal.
mhm,
But I was still playing real estate, quite honestly. My wife and I decided when we had our little ones, she would not work. She wanted to be an at-home mom with our kids until they went to elementary school.
mhm,
And that time crept up on me pretty quick. So I was in a position where I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to care for the finances of our family moving forward, and we're having a child. Like I was in meltdown mode. And
mm,
so number 1, I had to make a decision to commit to this business. It was basically burn the boats. Like stop playing real estate. It's time to be a professional. Okay.
mm,
The commitment alone was really important because what that led to is sitting down, getting some support from mentors around me, and laying out a blueprint. And here were the three things that I did. Okay. Number one, knocking doors.
mm,
My door knock strategy, though, was really specific. It was around the cycle of a home selling. So I would door knock around new listings when that listing went pending, when that listing ultimately sold, and if I could get an open house during that time around me hosting the open house. Now, I did this type of door knocking because it gave me an opportunity and a purpose with a message to show up to a door more than once. because I know how
Mm,
hard it is to cold knock a door and close. But if I could build rapport and start to establish who I really am, I'm someone who is going to follow through. When I say I'm going to do something like return, I'm going to do it. It started to build a momentum in a farm that I had. So I door knocked and I door knocked around the cycle of a sale. I held open houses because I'm a huge believer in open houses.
mm,
New home salespeople for builders, the Pulte homes, the KB homes, the Lennar, that's the only thing that they do every day of their life is essentially hold an open house in the model homes. Okay. That's how powerful that one activity is. I think I've shared this with you, but I'll say it again for the sake of this question. I have a really good buddy of mine, like a partner in the business, Woods Davis.
mm,
Woods ran a team across several states, over 50 agents, and he tested this for 5 months. He had them do consistent open houses. And we're talking agents that were brand new to the business. We're talking agents who maybe were 20 years in the business, like that varied. We're talking properties that were priced really well and properties that were probably overpriced. What he found over that period of time, though, is that on average, his agents would get one new client for every 3 open houses. Now, they were doing some things right there. All right. They were engaging
mm,
in real estate conversations, they were doing proper follow up. So, those things definitely led to those metrics. But for every 3 open houses, one new client doesn't mean a closing, but a new client, new buyer, new seller to work with. So I took that very seriously and I was very consistent with doing open houses. And usually I was doing about 4 a month, like once every weekend. So door knocking, open houses, and then the number one thing that I did, and I know I'm saying it three, but it was literally the most important thing, was shoring up that database and a communication plan to people that I knew.
mm,
Because why are you going to hold open houses? Why are you going to knock on doors? Why are you going to cold call? Why are you going to network? Why are you going to do all those things if you don't have a very serious plan and ability to follow up with these people to develop that relationship? This
mm,
is about relationship development. If you're going to meet someone once, have a great time with them, and never talk to them again, that's not a very effective relationship.
mm,
So you have to shore up that database. And some people are resistant because they're like, well, I don't really have a database, or all my database, they've already bought a home. It's like you're not getting it. It's not only about those people, it's about the mechanism, the system, the process. Get that shored up anyway, and then pour those leads in. More importantly, when people go through the process of developing a database with me, they start to really uncover the roots that are available to them that they're not thinking about. It's not just who are your aunts, uncles, cousins, and then your friends. I'll give you an example because I use this analogy all the time. My
mm,
cousin is named Dana. Okay, it's my mom's sister's daughter, my cousin, Dana. When Dana was growing up, she had a really good friend named Megan. Okay, that Megan was like her best friend, super fun, loud personality, right? And so Megan was part of the family because whenever we'd see them on weekends, Megan was always there. It's her bestie. Okay, Megan's mom is named Carol. We obviously got to know them because Megan was always around and the mom would come around and she was super nice. If I was walking down the aisle of a grocery store right now, Cameron, and I was minding my own business, but Carol saw me, Carol absolutely would be like, Joey, what are you doing here? This is my cousin's best friend's mom. And Carol needs to be in my database and in yours. We really have to be mindful about the connections and the relationships, the roots of our network, and make sure we get them into our database. I think if people did that, they would find a lot more opportunities in their database, and it's way bigger than they thought. Shore up that communication so you can get the business from them, but then that's the same process you pour your leads into as well.
This one says, how do you deal with a seller who lets you go through your whole listing presentation
Uh-huh.
and then they tell you that they were planning on doing a for sale by owner? So I'm assuming that they did the listing presentation, the agent came in, did the listing presentation, and then after that, the seller was like, "Hey, we're considering going for sale by owner."
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I've never had that happen before, in all fairness.
Hmm.
But I think it's really important that people know the behind for sale by owners? How much less do they sell for in your specific market versus a home that's listed professionally?
Mhm.
If you walk around with that kind of data or information at your disposal, then I think a really easy transition could be, okay, great. So you're thinking about selling it on your own. Let me ask you why? What's the purpose behind you selling it on your own? And most of the time people will answer, but if they're not going to cut to the chase, you can simply ask them, is this to save money? Are you worried about paying commissions? That's 90% of the reason why that happens. And if that's the case, you go, okay, great. I totally understand your concern there. But let me ask you maybe a more important question. Are you more worried about compensation that you pay, or is it more important to you about the bottom line, how much money you walk away with when you sell your home? Because most people who are at least not upset with agents for some strange reason, because it could happen, but most reasonable people will say, well, I'm just thinking of my bottom line. Like, I just want the most I can get out of my home. Then, if you can speak to them with data to help them understand that hiring you as a professional actually net them enough to not only pay for your services, but that will still be a positive to their bottom line versus selling it on their own. Now you're having a conversation with them that is not um, emotionally energized. It's one that's more matter of fact.
Nice, nice. All right, so this one may be a little bit long, but and let me know if it's like the same as the other one, but it's a more specific question to the seller wanting above market value for their home.
Okay.
And so yeah, so uh it says, what do you do if the owner wants to list for like 50 to $100,000 over market value, even after showing them comps? And then it says, I explain the market and how starting so overpriced and then doing price drops is more detrimental than starting at a better price
Yep.
right off the bat, and potentially getting offers calling for best and final. He wants to list, so the seller wants to list for $500,000. Comps show similar properties sold at 375 to 425.
Oof.
A new construction nearby sold for 460, and his property was built in 1930. He wasn't really interested in hearing what I had to say as far as comps and pricing because he had his mind set on trying to get $500,000.
Okay.
He let me know he'll be interviewing a few other agents as well. I'm sure many agents will tell him anything to get the listing and then hope he drops the price so it can sell.
Mhm.
Is that what I should do as well, or what should I do?
Yeah, that's actually a good and a different question. So a couple of things. Like number one, it sounds like they did run numbers with them. One of the things that I try to do with a seller like this, because if you think about that conversation, it feels combative. Okay.
Mm,
What I'm going to try to do is align myself as their partner, their team. So instead of us
mm,
doing this, I'm trying to come around and say, no, I'm on your side. Here's how I do it.
mm,
What I'll help them understand is like, listen, you have to know that what I really appreciate about how we're approaching compensation is that our goals are aligned. So Cameron, you understand, like, if I have the ability to, I'm gonna sell your home for $1 million
mhm,
because when you make more, I get compensated more. So our goals are aligned. I want you to understand that. I'm with you. Here's my concern. And then we can speak to a bunch of different data points. It could be uh, the data point we talked about when a home hits the market, where it's at on perceived value is going to mean who even walks through the door. You can definitely point to the other properties around the specific comparables like this agent did. One of the other approaches I can take with a seller is, listen, here's my concern for you. Even if I did an amazing job in my marketing and salesmanship and got a buyer to write an offer for you at $1 million, here's my concern. If it's financed, how are we going to substantiate value to an appraiser? So even if I could do what you're asking for, I'm concerned that it still won't come to fruition because an appraiser is still going to apply their value and I can't substantiate the amount that we're talking about.
mhm,
So there's several ways that you could do it, but I think the most important thing to do is help them understand that I'm not your competition here. It's not, my idea is better than yours. I'm on your side. But from the perspective of me trying to help you be successful, let me share with you why, even though I'm on your side, why that could be a failed experiment.
Mm,
Finally, finally. Now, this is going to be a tough one for the example that we have. But let's say we're talking about a seller that's like, listen, you know, properties are selling for 375. I really want to try for 400. Here's something that I can do, but you really got to make sure not only you pin them down on agreement, but you might even make sure that you write it in your listing contract as well. And that's this. All right, seller, here's what we're going to do. Now, the example we got, that's way out there. I don't think that will ever work. So,
mm,
but I'm talking one that's a little more reasonable, a little bit closer to
mm,
reality.
mm,
Here's what we're going to do. And this is part of my listing presentation anyway, but I show them. We know that after about 6 weeks on the market, traditionally, that's when the interest level of a property falls off the map. It's like a
mm,
cliff. Okay. That's like the death nail, 6 weeks.
mm,
Right.
mm,
So we could approach your pricing strategy, but at the longest, if 21 days go by and we don't have showings and offers, then you need to agree to sit down with me again so we can reassess value and then properly make the price change that we need to get you under contract within the next 2 weeks thereafter. And like one of the other agents said in the question, that like in our 375 to 400 example, it wouldn't be going, okay, well, let's go back to 375 because that's not going to cut it now. We're probably going to have to go down to like a 369, a 365 to really show a powerful transition in pricing to get people energized to show up. But if I don't get a seller to be reasonable and agree to that, I'm not taking that listing because you're going to spend money on marketing, professional video and photo. You're coming out of pocket on a failed experiment, and you know that as an agent.
mm,
So, unfortunately, in like the dynamic this agent talked about, I know it hurts, but it sounds to me like that seller is going to go find whatever agent's willing to do that for them. And if they're that hard set on it, let someone else go and spend their money because they very likely won't get it back.
mhm. Yeah, that's good. That's really good. I like that. Any final words for real estate agents that are maybe going on their first few listing appointments
Yeah.
and just maybe any final words for those individuals?
Yeah, I've got some really good ways in which to build out a listing presentation that were really effective for me anyway. Number one, I created my presentation out of literally like 20 different listing presentations out there. And I thought about very, very deeply what my value propositions were that separated me from other agents. What are the standards of selling real estate? And like I mentioned before, what are some of the core values that I want repeated through my sales process? And I looked at a bunch of different presentations, started to pull out things that either spoke to one of those three areas or that followed a sequence that made sense for me, put them together, and I literally printed them and put them on a floor. Because then what I thought about is, what is my communication style? What do I want to talk about first? What's the story I want to tell, or like the journey in which I want to walk a seller through? And I started to rearrange slides based on my communication style, the story that I wanted, and as of course, like what I thought made the most sense, the most compelling journey for that seller, so that it made sense. Like when we're done here, we're moving on and signing. Okay. So I would encourage an agent to do that. The other thing I would say is try to make it so that your listing presentation can be templated so that you can put in stats and data
Mhm.
so it looks customized to that seller, but it's only a few extra slides. It's not much. Okay.
Mm,
And then finally, I think that role playing your listing presentation is key. I think
mhm,
that if you can get in front of other agents and get in front of, it can be an audience of one, but get in front of an audience that knows if you messed up, that knows if
mm,
you said something wrong, that knows if you could have said something in a different way that would have a better result. And I think that's important for two reasons. One, it'll never be that hard again. So your confidence should build. But then
Mhm.
number two, you might be getting tiny little tweaks that could make all the difference.